Thor, Love and Thunder. So Thor returns in a film that I was quite excited about, Taika Waititi directing again. The trailers look good, it looked like a fun movie. But then, as I heard reviews coming in, because I was late to seeing the movie, I did become a bit concerned. My initial feeling after seeing it was decent. It was decent. I think it's better than Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, but it has issues, and if certain things had been tweaked here and there, it could have been a much better movie. The plot follows Thor as he struggles to realise who he is and what he desires, with Jane coming back into his life as the mighty Thor, and a new threat coming onto the scene in Gorr the God Butcher. Gorr is played by Christian Bale. This seems like a sort of thing that Christian Bale would never do. I never thought he would get involved in the MCU. It seems like something that he would just frown upon automatically, but he was really, really good in this film. I think he was the standout. I was gripped by his character. His delivery of dialogue was really, really good, and I think he was a great character, and I think it's a shame we didn't get a little bit more of him, but I still think we got plenty of him. But an issue in the film that starts with Gorr and then becomes clearly evident with Jane and Thor is the fact that everything is a bit rushed in this movie, especially the introductions for these characters. Similar to Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, this film needed to be longer, at least 20 to 30 minutes, because it once again felt like a film that couldn't be bothered with a meaningful and paced setup. So it just sped up everyone's introduction to get the plot moving. It was very brief. It's like, here's 5 minutes with Gorr, here's 5 minutes with Thor, here's 5 minutes with Jane. Let's show them what's been going on with them recently and then get them into the picture. We haven't seen Jane in a long time, so there definitely needed to be more build up with her. I'm pretty sure we haven't seen her since The Dark World, apart from that little glimpse you get of her in Endgame, but that was like a flashback to The Dark World anyway, so, it's been a while for her. In terms of Gorr, he's a new character, he's a new villain. I think a little bit more of his story would have been nice to see how he turned into a villain, because he wasn't always a villain. And then with Thor, we haven't seen him since the end of Endgame, where we find out he's going to join the Guardians, and then we barely get any time with him where he's with the Guardians before he just sort of leaves them to go on his new adventure. So I just think we needed a little bit more for all of these characters. I think if this movie was 2 hours 40 or 2.5 hours, it really could have been effective. Everything would have been more effective if it had just been drawn out a little bit more. It's exactly how I felt about the second Doctor Strange film, because that film was very rushed all round, and if that had been spaced out and been a 2 hour 40 movie, it would have been much, much better. I'm not sure why MCU are cutting their film run times at the moment, because you're hearing these things like the studio saying it needs to be 2 hours, it needs to be 2 hours. These films should not be 2 hours. I don't know why they're doing it. Is it budgets? Are they just trying to pump out loads of stuff so it can't be a certain length? I'm not really sure how it works. You wouldn't think 20 minutes extra would make a difference, because clearly the people writing and directing these movies are writing them for them to be longer than this, because it's not working. I've heard things that this movie had to be chopped down, so I don't know why that's the thing, but it is harming the movies massively. My other issue with this film was the tone of it as well. It's going for a comedy feel like Ragnarok, but it felt like they didn't know when to cut the comedy at times, and for me, at least, a lot of the jokes didn't land. To be fair, I may have been grumpyish because at the time I was very sleep deprived, because I got back from holiday that day at 3 a.m. At times I was really struggling to stay awake, and that's no reflection on the movie. I was just tired. But either way, the jokes they just weren't landing for me at all. A lot of it felt forced, especially on certain characters like Jane and Valkyrie, who have never been comedy characters before in the films. So now that they've just made them like that, turn into comedy characters, I really don't like it when the MCU does it. They did it with Hulk. It didn't work, and they just kept him as a comedy character, and it never suited him. With Thor, it has worked. He always had that sort of wit about him, so when they did make that switch in Ragnarok, it worked. But here, again, it didn't. It needs to at least be a more subtle transition if they're trying to make characters more comedy-like, because the fact that in these films one film they're serious, the next they're not, it doesn't work. Saying that, the film was like this for the first half, it was more comedy-based, but once the film settled, about halfway through, and then the path was clear, our characters took a more serious stance, and that matched that of Gorr. which was better because Gore is very serious. He comes across as menacing. They never give him stupid comedy one-liners, which was nice. They always keep him serious throughout. So when the characters eventually catch up with that, our heroes, it feels like a much better balance. And this was definitely the best for Thor. It was nice to see him take on a bit more seriousness again, because obviously, don't get me wrong, he is very funny as a comedy character, but it was nice to see him actually take on some seriousness again. It felt like that hasn't really happened since Infinity War. So, and they had a really good balance in that movie for Thor, and it was nice here when he did become serious again, especially the fact that he's battling Gore, he's also battling for love, and he's also battling for what he wants for himself. He's battling for how he wants to change as a person. So yeah, the film does feel a little bit off tonally because it starts off very comedic for the most part, but then you've got a sinister villain, and then eventually it sort of catches up, and then it becomes a more serious tone with occasional, laughs put in. That works better, but even so, the comedy just didn't really feel like it worked that much. It felt a little forced. Regardless, this is not a bad movie. It's just very clear what is not right with this movie and what could have been changed, I think, to make it better quite easily, and that is an extra 20-30 minutes at least, and less comedy. At least less cheesiness, less goofiness, just, bring it all together a little bit more, flesh things out. I think you've got a much better movie on your hands here. The casting and the characters are not an issue at all here. For the most part as well, this movie looks pretty good, although there is a bit of shoddy CGI in here, but it's not too bad. And, the soundtrack was really good as well. I really liked the soundtrack for this movie. It's one of the best MCU ones, I think. But again, Phase 4, people have been saying it's lacking like a direction and an identity, like what it's really trying to go for. I think with a film like this, I can't really pick on that issue too much, but even so, it feels like everyone's just freestyling right now. Like, it doesn't feel like these movies are linked like they were in the first 3 phases, where everything was leading up to Infinity War, everything was leading up to the Stones and Thanos. Right now, it just feels very scattered, and I feel like when they do eventually do like a team-up movie or whatever, it's going to feel very forced. It's not going to feel like there was a clear build-up to that, and I'm not even sure they know what they're doing at this stage. Of course, they're putting a lot of focus on the TV shows, and the TV shows have been like very, very hit or miss. And even ones that are good aren't outstanding. Like Loki and Moon Knight, they've both got some issues, but they're good. But even so, I just think the focus should be on the movies, but it seems like the focus is actually on the TV shows, and the movies are being sacrificed in that sense. The movies should be longer, and a Doctor Strange sequel and Thor's 4th movie should not be receiving reviews like they have been, but they are, because they're just not that good. They're nowhere near as good as they should be, and they're people's favorite heroes. They're some of people's favorite characters, so they really should be making sure these are the movies that land. It's a case of when Spider-Man starts going downhill, then we've really got a problem, but luckily they haven't really fucked up any of the Spider-Man stuff so far. Nevertheless, I enjoyed this film, even though it probably sounds like from that whole review that I didn't. I did enjoy this film. It's something I would rewatch as well. So if I had to give it a rating, I would say 7 out of 10, and on the rewatchability rating, I would say this is something I would watch every few years, and I would go through it again on an MCU binge. I wouldn't skip it. Regardless, I've been Joe Squared. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.